So I want to jump right into this idea, this concept that I was talking about in my previous video about this new worldview, this new way of thinking that's coming into society. And I want to explain that a little further and show you how important it is for you to understand what this is. So I'm going to introduce this concept to you by asking you to think about some questions. How do you know what you know? How do you justify what you know? Where does knowledge come from? Where does knowledge authority come from? If there's a disagreement on an issue, how would you expect to work through that disagreement? So just take a minute, think about these questions, think about how you would answer them. Maybe pause the video here for a minute, and we'll come back and explain a little further. So what these questions lead to, and what your answers to these questions lead to, is a very fancy word called epistemology. And epistemology is basically the processes that people use to gain knowledge. How do they come about knowing what they know? And you can imagine how important this word is, how important this concept is in society, right? How society comes about knowing what it knows and what it bases its knowledge on is incredibly important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down in general terms kind of 3 time periods in history where societies have used different epistemologies, different ways of knowing that they base their knowledge on. So this is a lot of information. So I decided to create this chart, hopefully be able to keep it organized so that I can show it a little more clearly and explain what I'm talking about. Basically, these 3 columns here represent 3 time periods that had 3 different dominant epistemologies, 3 different dominant ways of knowing, of gaining knowledge that society operated under. So I want to start with this middle time period here, and it's referred to as the modern era, right? During the modern era, knowledge was evidence-based. There was an evidence-based authority. This was the age of the Enlightenment, of logic and reason, the scientific method. Basically, all ideas were allowed in what's referred to as this marketplace of ideas, where people could present their ideas, their theories, their opinions, and they could back them up with evidence. And these ideas could be challenged and questioned and tested by other people to see if they held up to scrutiny and to see if they could be relied upon. And so this resulted in what I'm referring to as one knowledge that governs society. That society could basically trust that you could rely on to move forward. Now, if you transgressed, or if you had a different idea or opinion or theory other than what was accepted as let's say mainstream knowledge, then you were welcome to state your case and to convince others with debate and evidence. And so this was allowed, and it often led to new knowledge and new discoveries. Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the ideas and the concepts in this modern era, this modern epistemology. And I imagine most of you assume that we are still operating under this modern era, this modern epistemology. What I want to do now is I just want to jump back to the time period before the modern era, and it's called the pre-modern era, right? So in this time period, the religious authority basically had the ultimate say in what knowledge was. Right? There was one set of ideas that was allowed. These ideas cannot be questioned or challenged, and so this also resulted in one knowledge that governs society. But if you transgressed, or if you had a different opinion than what the religious authority was stating as true, then you were canceled. You were outcast or excommunicated, labeled as a heretic, or maybe even burned at the stake. So, having ideas outside of what the religious authorities were presenting as being true was not a good idea during the pre-modern era. So now I want to come over to this new time period here, and this is what I'm referring to as this new worldview, this new way of thinking that's coming into society. And this is referred to as the postmodern era. And I put applied here because scholars can debate forever, what postmodernism is and how it's supposed to work and what it's supposed to be and all these things. But what really matters is how these ideas are being applied in society. So what's happening is now we're shifting to personal authority, which is based in lived experience. Now there's multiple sources based on personal or grouped lived experience. These ideas cannot be questioned or challenged, and what this results in is multiple knowledges that govern society. And if you transgress, if you have a different idea or opinion than what is supposedly mainstream knowledge or mainstream society, you are canceled. You are outcast. You are labeled a bigot, and you may even be fired from your job. And so you can see this happening. You can see this happening in mainstream society now. This what's referred to as cancel culture, right? Somebody says something or does something either now, or somebody finds out that they did it 5 or 10 or more years earlier in their life. Then they are mobbed with people calling for them to be fired, for them to be called to be basically canceled from society. So this is how it is presenting itself in our society today. So take a minute and look at the 3 different time periods, the 3 different dominant epistemologies, and compare to see some similarities and some differences, and just kind of step back, look at the big picture, and think of some pros and cons of these different epistemologies and their impact on society. Go ahead and pause the video for a minute and take some time to look at that. Now, if you are working under the assumption that society is still operating under this modern era, this modern epistemology, and things are starting to shift to this postmodern epistemology, you can see how there's going to be a disconnect. If you are looking at this postmodern way of thinking and saying to yourself that this sounds crazy, that's because it is. It's basically nonsense built on top of nonsense that's grounded in nonsense. As you learn more about postmodernism and how it's being applied, it's actually designed to be destructive. As you learn more about it, you will see that it's intended to deconstruct and destruct the current system in the hopes of replacing it with whatever the postmodernists want to replace it with. You can also see that the idea that there can be multiple knowledges by multiple groups of people or that come from multiple groups of people, and that these ideas cannot be questioned or challenged, what happens if there is a disagreement between groups of people on how to move forward on an issue? And these groups of people are stuck in their thinking, and there's no way to have conversations and to bridge that divide. This results in conflict and ultimately will result in violence. There's no other way around it. Also, under the modern era, you can see how things were based in evidence, at least as best as they could be, right? No system is perfect, but there were, checks and balances in place to review ideas, to test ideas, and ultimately, the ideas, the knowledge that rose to the top was based in evidence. One of the things that is happening is that many people still assume that we're still operating under this modern way of gaining knowledge, and they still have some level of trust in the evidence that is presented to back up claims, without realizing that there's been a shift into this applied postmodern way of thinking and gaining knowledge that in many cases is based on things that so-called researchers are making up. And there's a recent article in Quillette magazine that provides great insight into how this is happening. And so let me show you what that is. This is the article that I'm referring to. It's in Quillette magazine. I will put the link to this article in the description in this video. The article is called, "I Basically Just Made It Up, Confessions of a Social Constructionist." So, I strongly suggest that you read this article, and while you're reading it, I'd ask you to think about, the policies that are being implemented that are based off of, research and evidence and studies that are basically, as the title says here, basically just being made up, that are total nonsense. Another thing I'd like you to take a closer look at is the similarities in this pre-modern and postmodern epistemologies, in that people are expected to just take the word of what they're being told and accept it as being true without question. It's very much like a faith-based system. So for more information on this, I'm going to show you a video of James Lindsay explaining this further. In this video, he's with Peter Boghossian and Helen Pluckrose. I already introduced you to James and Peter in my last video. Helen is the editor of Ariel magazine, and she's a colleague of James and Peter. She's an expert on social justice theory as well. This video is produced by Mike Nana, who has been documenting the work of James, Peter, and Helen. And I strongly suggest you take a look at his YouTube channel to find a lot more information about this topic. So for now, take a look at this video for some more explanation on how the postmodern way of thinking is very similar to a faith-based or a religious-based epistemology.
Jim, give us what is religion? It's a disambiguate that. It's a tricky term.
Religion's actually, so to give you guys some background on why I would tell you what a religion is, I've spent several years studying religious psychology and moral psychology with kind of a keen research interest. And so I'm coming at it from those perspectives. Religion is a very difficult construct to define. They tend to be meaning-making structures, but at their very bottom, the way that they act as meaning-making structures are as communities. So you have scriptural or doctrinal definitions of what moral structure there is. These are used in order to define, shape, and enforce the boundaries of a community. These communities are called moral communities in general. And religions equip them with a dogma or a doctrine or a scripture that gives them an inherent ideology. They evolved alongside human cultures in order to solve certain social and psychological problems that people all have. We have needs, we need order, we need structure in society. We need to understand our place in the community and how we fit into the community, how to relate to one another. They have specific features. They tend to focus on moral purity for the in-group. They tend to demonize the out-group. They especially demonize heretics or blasphemers or anybody who goes too far outside of that dogmatic often structure of belief and threatens it. Those people are often excommunicated. So these kinds of structures are very prominent within religions. What we're actually seeing, and this may actually explain some elements that we see in political movements on the right, on the left, even within in various factions, is that we now see people who are lacking religion and searching for it, and they're acting out its basic shapes. They're excommunicating people, they're driving purity, they are judging and burning apostates, heretics.
The failure to interrogate patriarchy and anti-racism, the failure to interrogate racism and feminism continue to shape modern politics. Now, these consequences are often invisible to the naked eye, and the naked eye is the eye that's not accustomed to looking at issues through an intersectional prism. There is, however, a solution, a practice that can heighten our capacity to see the limitations of a non-intersectional feminism or a non-intersectional racism.
God's word is the weapon of our warfare to defend our mind, to battle against the assault on our mind that takes place daily. And when you understand how important this is, you can see that the devil is out to get your mind.
24/7, the forces around us push and seduce and compel us to participate, and the only way to not collude is to actively, intentionally, and strategically seek to resist those forces.
Evil exists. We admit it. It is massive. It is dominant. It is uncontrollable. It is systemic. It is outside us. It is inside us.
So an anti-racist frame understands racism as a system. While individual players partake in it, it's not dependent on individual players. Right? It's embedded in the fabric of the society, in all the institutions, the norms, the practices, the policies, the way that history is told.
You cannot go anywhere in this universe without the effects of evil being manifest. Well, let's move to the next factor in our reasoning.
So rather than use defensiveness or emotional reactions as doors out, use them as doors in. Be excited. Like, oh, okay, this is totally challenging me. I don't like that at all. Why? What can that help me uncover about the way I make meaning of race? Because there's so much depth under the surface.
If you are feeling that way, then the Word of God is taking its right effect in your heart. Paul wants you to let go of any excuse, dismantle any excuse that you would have before God.
So according to the Bible, the Christian life is a war. It's a battle, and that battle is for your mind. And the devil is out to take control of your mind.
I believe we are capable of unlearning the habits of mind that perpetuate white privilege. What I am uncertain of is our collective will to examine those habits.
I believe deeply in the critical and audacious goal of eliminating racism and violence in our world. I believe we're all privileged to engage in that work in a learning community that wants to be better. And I believe we have the will to do so.
I believe this is a time for more understanding, more love, more sensitivity, and honor. And I want to be part of that. Thank you for listening and for helping me listen too.
I'd like those of you who are able to join us in saying these names as loud as you can, randomly, disorderly. Let's create a cacophony of sound.
Oh my God, I believe in equal rights! Oh my God, I believe that!
I don't believe in it.
Homophobia
men shouldn't dictate a fucking woman's place in the world. You fucking douchebags! You misogynistic pieces of shit!
I refuse to let whiteness consume me. And I'm going to say that word explicitly, whiteness. I refuse.
If I may be so honored to have all the female nominees in every category stand with me in this room tonight. The actors, Meryl, if you do it, everybody else will, come on. The songwriters, the designers, come on. Ms. Boyman.
My name is Black Rose! You're a fucking problem, too, you motherfucker! You're not protecting the NYU students here! And I'm disgusted! I'm a professor! How dare you!
This is about everyone. This is love. We have to get this man out.
Replace us! You will not replace us! You will not replace us! You will not replace us!
The cost is too high, and the implications are too much. And at some point in time, if this campus is going to stand up for what it espouses to be, it needs to say enough is enough.
I want to mention that in the description of this video, Mike points out that it's worth mentioning we are not claiming that either social justice or religion are inherently bad. We're neutral in this regard. The claim is social justice takes on many of the qualities of a religion and should be recognized and treated as such. And I wanted to echo that sentiment. I think that's, very important to point out. Also, at the end of the video, it mentions that it was an introduction for a written piece. And that written piece can be found in Ariel Magazine. I have it up on the screen here. I'm going to go ahead and put the link to this article in the description of my video so you can access that directly and read this article when you get a chance. There's a lot more information to present, but I have to end this video here. Some of you might be wondering why I am talking about postmodernism and epistemologies when I told you that this video series was about New York schools implementing a toxic agenda. The only way that you will understand the information that I'll be presenting on what's being implemented in the schools is to understand all of this background information that I'm giving you in these first videos. I told you there is a tremendous amount of information, and I wasn't kidding. I have a few more concepts to explain, and then I will be getting into specific examples of what's being implemented in the school system in New York and in school systems throughout the country. But you will be able to understand what I'm showing you a lot better now that you have this background information first. I want to thank those of you who have been watching these videos and who have been sharing information with me. I want to welcome the many new viewers who have joined the video series recently. If you think this video series is helpful in understanding what's going on, I ask you to please share it with other people that you think who might be interested in what I'm presenting. So read the article in Quillette magazine that I had mentioned in this video and the article in Ariel magazine that I had mentioned. The links to those articles will be in the description, and I will talk to you soon.